Hello, and welcome to the Digital Workspace Works podcast. I'm Ryan Purvis, your host, supported by our producer Heather Bicknell. In this series, you'll hear stories and opinions from experts in the field, stories from the front lines, the problems they face and how they solved them, the areas they focused on from technology, people and processes, to the approaches they took that will help you to get to the grips with the digital workspace inner workings. So welcome, Mark, to the Digital Workspace Works podcast. Thanks for making some time for us. Do you want to start off with giving us a bit of an introduction?
Oh, thank you for having me on. Hello, everyone. My name is Mark Chillingworth. I've been writing and editing for the CIO and CTO community for 12 years now, or just over 12 years. And find myself, I suppose, as the community editor, predominantly in the UK, but across Europe increasingly. And it's a fantastic place to be.
That's great. Very interesting. And tell us, when you do your writing, what are you looking for topics-wise? How do you find those topics?
That's a good question. So although probably the industry would term me a technology journalist, anybody who's seen me use technology would quickly dispel that rumor because it's a pretty frustrating experience, particularly for the computer. So I suppose I consider myself a business journalist, and business is about people. We all do business. We all interact with businesses. We're all members of businesses, and businesses are both their strength is their people, and sometimes their weakness is their people. And I just find that fascinating. I love meeting CIOs and CTOs, going to their organizations when you're allowed, and getting under the hood and finding out, seeing the passion in a CIO and CTO's eyes as they show the organization and they introduce you to their team members and to the other people who are not directly in their team, but of course sort of pivotal to what the organization is doing. It's the greatest pleasure in the world. And, it's an honor to do the job I do, because I've been everywhere from on patrol across Salisbury Plain with Brigadier Alan Hill. I've been inside steel factories, NHS trust hospitals, and then, of course, your good old-fashioned office, but all of them are vital. And all of them, there are people there doing something with passion, I find, and I just love that.
When you said you were on patrol with the Brigadier, what were you actually doing?
Alan does very well out of this story of we went to a forward operating base on Salisbury Plain on a blisteringly hot summer's day. They were practicing to go out on a mission in Afghanistan, and this particular summer, you could have been. It was almost like some sort of time warp had happened, and you'd been teleported across the world to Afghanistan. Everything was golden and burnt dry and bristling and edgy, and we went to this forward operating base in a Land Rover and went into a tent. And straight away, you had this strange juxtaposition of a very, the enterprise technology environment that you will, and everyone listening knows inside out, tables, laptops, the SAN in the corner, and all that. And then suddenly a mortar goes off, which is all part of the practice mission. And everyone jumps to the floor, apart from the journalist who stands with his notepad. And Alan burst out in laughter and was like, "You're dead, mate." And and it was amazing. We spent the whole day there, and it was amazing to see how they rehearse every single element, and also the professionalism from the text to the frontline troops going out, and obviously all the technology interactions between all of that. That was amazing. But equally, people like Cindy Fedell have taken me around their NHS trusts and introduced me to, frontline nurses who are pushing the envelope of technology, and the passion and professionalism between Cindy and her team and Alan and his team. There is no difference, just the setting.
You mentioned that practice area, and going back to the military thing. Did they practice without technology? If the technology were to go down, an EMP pulse or something like that?
I'm pretty sure they did. You'd best off asking John Cole, is now the CIO for the British Army, who I had the pleasure of writing about earlier this year. But yeah, certainly the impression I came away from the NHS and the British Army is they practice and they train for every eventuality. It's unbelievable professionalism.
Yeah, it's something I've been wondering about, because we've now, with COVID, been pushed so hard to working from home and relying on this technology that for a lot of us was sort of normal, but for a lot of people it wasn't normal. Now everyone's using it, sort of everyone's leveled up to the same level. And the thing I was wondering about, what happens now if the technology were to fail? You weren't able to use Teams and Zoom and your laptops, and then could your businesses operate at all? Because of this reliance.
There's going to be these issues, aren't there? And we certainly saw at the beginning of the lockdown, when huge numbers, when Microsoft encouraged huge numbers of people to join Teams and then hadn't quite got their capacity management right. But hats off to Microsoft. They seem to have solved that issue very, very quickly. Zoom had similar issues. They resolved those very quickly. More security orientated, I believe, with Zoom. So I think, that we've reached a very fascinating level of ability to respond, haven't we? There will still be failures, and there'll still be peers of mine who enjoy telling the stories of the failures. But,
I don't want to monopolize this. You got anything you want to add or ask of Mark?
I guess I'm sure we'll get into it. Is there anything, Mark, that you've been writing about or editing kind of recently as a topic that we might want to cover, or that folks might be interested in?
It's a good question. I mean, unsurprisingly, probably just like the CIOs, my huge focus throughout 2020 has been the enterprise cloud. And I work with a number of really cutting edge technology companies, and they rightly see that actually there's going to be a tech boom off the back of this for those organizations who maybe weren't as prepared as others. And so I've been helping them with a lot of written and communications material, because there are organizations who I think as their market bounces back, or as just the economy returns to some form of normality, there will be a need to invest in the cloud, because it's clearly the most responsive technology for this new world we're navigating.
Do you have a feel for that? It's not a well-formed question, I guess, but for that growth, I mean, is it potentially businesses now moving their entire business to cloud and spending a fortune doing that transformation, or do you think it's pivoting completely into a new business line? I mean, do you have a feel either way on where that's going?
I get the feeling, actually, it's not the latter. It's not, actually that in some ways, I read increasingly that digital transformation to the sort of the fancy, glossy digital transformation of become an Uber or that sort of storyline, I think that's going to slow down to a degree. Business, every vertical market has taken a hammering through this. No matter how positive things look for the technology sector, every market has had a hit. Where I do see, I suppose the growth is that the optimization and the efficiency of the business, where IT and cloud can really make some good inroads and help lower operating costs and improve margin. I think that's going to increase. And certainly you look at last week's Harvey Nash CIO survey, massive increase in budgets for a short period of time. But obviously now, or as if we do return to some sort of normality, understandably the board are going to expect a return on investment and some sort of, knuckling down from that. And so, CIOs are in a really interesting place, I think, going forward, of delivering that optimization. But it may not be quite as sexy as building an entirely new digital business model for a new type of consumer or new consumer experience.
Yeah, I mean, because it is almost the plumbing that has to be sorted out, which is never sexy, because that's hidden behind the veil of something else. It has been interesting to sort of see in the group that you run and other groups, how many CIOs and CTOs have been stuck in more human or people-focused roles. So they've had to, absorb HR into it, but now work very closely with HR or be in steer codes with HR, where HR was kind of this other tower and technology was another tower, and they were kind of doing their own things with some overlap.
I agree, yeah. And that's a testament to the role, isn't it? And one of the things I find fascinating about the work I do is leadership. I don't think the English-speaking world's particularly good at understanding that leadership is a skill in itself, is a great talent. And yet, funnily enough, we're all sports obsessed in these and entertainment obsessed, and yet, none of our teams in our favourite sports would get anywhere without a great leader. For me, it's my love is cycling, and Dave Brailsford, to all accounts, wasn't a particularly great bike racer, but my lord, is he a damn good bike team leader. And we see that across football, rugby, tennis, all sorts. And yet we don't seem to extrapolate that to the world of business and what have you, that completely understanding that leadership is a great skill. And I think it's a testament that to come back on track, so many of these CIOs have become good they are good leaders. They just happen to have 60% of their responsibility is the technology function.
Yeah, and I think that is about, to a large extent, communication, being able to communicate, and for a lot of, well, at least a lot of my career, what we did was always too technical, always we felt was too complicated to explain to the average business person, and to have those skills of being able to communicate those things, and be able to not necessarily simplify it to the point of making everyone feel talked down to or less than, but just getting across that this is hard work to be done, but it will deliver this value, and come back to your ROI point. I think there's because of this pandemic, we've artificially accelerated everyone else's learning curve that they can get that this technology does work and does have some ROI, but it may not be as direct as people want it to be.
Absolutely, and we saw that in 2008, 2009 with the banking crisis, and I think that was the real first completely business-focused step forward for CIOs. And I'll always remember it because we managed to turn, my team and I managed to turn CIO magazine around from being a loss maker to a very profitable publication in that period, in that year, in fact, during 2008. So when everything went belly up at the end of the latter half of 2008, we had a very viable publication. Because the market course actually wanted to talk to the most senior business technology leader in that. And the CIO by the end of 2008, 2009 was clearly a very business-minded technology leader.
I mean, is that what you're saying? So if we went back sort of that 12-year period to when you started to where you're now, I mean, have you seen drastic changes in the role, CIO, CTO, CDO even, or CISO?
I wouldn't say drastic, but I definitely think, they became welcomed as business leaders, and they've proved. And I think they were already on and it has only really become aware. Sort of reminded me recently. Actually, I had a conversation with one of the big retail CIOs. They've already begun to win their spurs, obviously in 2000 with Y2K, which there's lots of people going out on it was a myth and all the rest of it. Was it, well, or did technology do its job and make sure everything stood up? And I think it is more of the latter. So they'd already begun their ascendancy, but I think the banking crisis was it was all about business, wasn't it? There was no failing in technology because of the banking crisis. It was a break in the marketplace, and COVID is the same. And so it gave them that huge opportunity to demonstrate business value because, so many organizations needed to tighten their belts. And then, not long after that, the iPhone arrived and began to really change markets. And so it's been a fascinating 12 years for CIOs. So not drastic changes. I think where there is a slight change coming in the market, and again, writing about the Harvey Nash report was interesting last week, is I think we are seeing a growth of the more ops-centric technology leader, someone who can just keep the business absolutely performing optimally and delivering everything it promises its customer. And then we have seen this CTPO type job title, Chief Technology and Product Officer, and they are the technology leaders who can envisage, but probably more importantly, galvanize and lead a team of people who will create new products and services. and we've seen them in the travel sector, in retail, and that. And I think there is a bit of a divide happening in the role now, and they're both absolutely brilliant roles, and it's a personality thing, I suppose, as to, I think over the next year or so, some CIOs will probably have to really look at themselves and go, actually, that CTPO piece is there's so much stakeholder management, there's so much, outbound communicating, talking, salesmanship effectively. That's not really me, but I love building great teams who build and operate great technology, and but hugely important roles, both of them, and organizations and the CIO need to decide which one they need.
It's funny you say that, because as you were explaining the two roles, I was literally thinking, which one am I? And I see the CTPO one more than the sort of operational focused one. I mean, I've had to do both in my career, but I definitely get more interested in the CTPO one.
I think over the recent years as well, the operational bit's got a little bit sort of misaligned and misunderstood, as if it's a bad thing. And I think actually what COVID has done actually shown how probably all CIOs have to be really good at the operational bit. Yeah, and we've had that conversation for years, and you can't get a seat on the board unless you got the ops bit. Yeah. As businesses try to reconfigure themselves post-pandemic, some of those really operationally strong CIOs are actually going to be the rock stars going forward, because that's exactly what their vertical market or business will need. I think we've had a few years where the product-orientated CIOs have been more of the rock stars, and that was right and proper, because we were transitioning into a new type of economy. Yeah. Now we don't. None of us quite yet know what type of economy we will be in when you and I catch up this time next year.
True. Did you? I don't know if you listened to we published an episode now on which Star Trek captain would you choose for your digital transformation, and it kind of alludes to what you're saying there. There's a Benjamin Sisko run a Starbase operational captain, and then you've got the more exploratory product one, I guess, which would be your Janeways, your Picards, your Archers that are out exploring the universe, solving problems. I don't know if you caught that, but it was kind of the same analogy.
I haven't, no, and I'm not a big Star Trek watcher, so I'm not very good on that one. Maybe it's the crew of the Millennium Falcon, and Chewbacca's going to come to the fore now. Whilst we've had the Han Solo good-looking rebel years for the last couple of years.
We should probably do a Star Wars version of that, because I think there are analogies there too. Yeah. You mentioned when we had our pre-call that you do a bit for CIOs as well, in the sense of writing communications for them. Do you want to tell us a bit about that?
Yeah, and it very much connects to that point you made earlier about the need to communicate. And all I do very simply is I do the writing for some CIOs and some IT departments, because as you say, so many CIOs have become aware of how important it is to communicate what they and their team are doing and what the impact on the business is, both positively and sometimes they need to explain some negative impacts that technology is having on their vertical market, and if they don't do something, the negative will increase. But obviously over 12 years, what I've noticed is CIOs all know that the need to spell out what's going on, but never have the time. Because there's always a board meeting, or there's always a new project or a new technology that's got to be implemented. And so a couple of CIOs very kindly have commissioned me, and I've sort of become their embedded writer in their organizations, and either go in or spend time with their teams and give everyone, and because the whole team is like that, isn't it? It's not just the CIO who's always busy. I generally find whenever I'm working with IT departments, everyone is absolutely full throttle all the time, delivering, and Agile, of course, promotes that sort of excitement, but also continuous way of working. And they never get that time to write. And if you don't write for a living, it's a pretty daunting task. And, waking up to a blank page frightens the hell out of a lot of people, but it's my day job. A blank page is the start of every day, and some days you have to get 4 blank pages out the door. Not blank, obviously. And so I just take that burden off them, is how I describe it, really, of, if you can give me 30 minutes of your time to brain dump what you and your team are delivering, then it's my job to make that good editorial, a readable story.
So what sort of pieces are you writing for these teams?
It's a variety, really. I mean, there's your quite obvious case study to explain what what a new technology is doing, why a particular project was taken through the organization. Some of it's thought leadership. So many organizations are transitioning the way they operate or the way they deal with their market and consumers. And there are people in the technology teams who absolutely have the knowledge and the passion to explain to the organization, we need to do it this way because our consumer base is changing or our market base is changing. But as I say, they don't have the time, so I can carry out that stuff. Other things is just good old fashioned explainers. One client recently asked for a wiki. They've become a distributed business. Could you produce a wiki that explains how all these different things work so that when people are stressed, oh, why isn't X happening for me, they can quickly, use the wiki and off we go.
Yeah. I mean, I guess, when you're that, sounds like, when you're that large of an organization, essentially anyone you're writing for, it's such a huge audience at that point. I could see it being quite daunting, almost like you're writing for customers.
Absolutely. And like Ryan said earlier, it's, within the team, although CIOs may have become less technical in some cases, within the team, of course, there are people who are deeply technical, and that's what we pay them to do. And I can consume all that knowledge off them. And despite not being any good at technology myself, I'm hopefully fairly good at understanding, well, this is what the story is. This is the piece of technical thing, and I'll explain it like this. And hopefully that helps as you say, the rest of the organization get, that's what Jeanette does. That's really clever.
Yeah. So how did you get into this writing about technology, not being, a super techie person yourself?
That's a good one. It really was in the mid 90s. Bizarrely, I started my career as a motor racing journalist. And basically you either were Jeremy Clarkson, which I wasn't, and or there was a pretty limited career in it, and because there's always another young fella who wants to, or lady who wants to write about motor racing, and will earn even less than you do. But I was booming at the time. Obviously, some of my first gigs as a technology writer were about the free ISP wars, when the first routers and that were being sent out to people's homes, and there was massive competition to onboard as many customers as possible. And so, having written about racing drivers and their cars for a bit, an editor obviously assumed that I'd be able to cope with IT. And so I moved into that, and I've never really left, really. I've been writing, as I say, although not a technical person, I've been writing about technology's impact on people and organizations ever since.
And I'm sure you've picked up some of the, all of the lingo over the years. Yeah. I
mean, it does have its own language. Yeah. And and even now, talking to my two daughters at times, my wife is a technologist, so I do find myself slipping into the language and see a raised eyebrow. I was like, either that doesn't make sense, or he says that as if he knows what he's talking about.
And what are your thoughts now that we're going through this pandemic, and it looks like we're going through our second wave here in the UK? I mean, what are your thoughts on future of work, or during COVID, the rest of our lives? Yeah, I mean, it's a really interesting time, and it's a really challenging time, isn't it? I mean, I come from a very manual labouring, agricultural, rural background, and you see it in the forums that we're all members of, that there's a degree of "I told you so," that this work from home and productivity and all of that would, the technology's there, people can be trusted, they'll get on with it, and they absolutely will. And COVID has been not a huge change in lifestyle for myself. I work from home anyway, and you carry on. But we're the lucky ones. Anybody working in technology, I think, for the next couple of years is incredibly fortunate. We are. This will be the next big step forward in the technological
digitization of our society, if that doesn't sound too buzzwordy. But we've already seen it happen with the Ubers and the way we all use Amazon and Netflix and all of that. But so much more will follow that path as a result. But I do worry, especially as a father, what do we do for those who don't work in technology or write about technology? And I think, we're moving for professionals, we're moving into a very portfolio orientated way to make a living. That's all well and good and necessary in many ways. But we do need to make sure that those who aren't professionals have a level of protection and lots of work flexibility and ability to reskill and educate. Because if we don't, we still haven't resolved in this country the closing of the heavy industries. I mean, much as that was necessary at the time, the job wasn't finished. When I travel around parts of the country, I see places that have been, ignored, and that's no way to treat any society.
No, you're right, and I think that's where things like universal basic income may come in.
It's fascinating, isn't it? Yeah, I mean, it's a topic I read about regularly and think, I wonder if this could work. It's something like that. We're clearly reaching a major inflection point in time, aren't we? The way, just as we did with the sort of divide between capitalism and communism, and now that sort of inflection point like that is coming. And hopefully some cleverer people than me are at the helm.
Yeah, I mean, I was listening to something the other day where they were comparing not so much socialism, but what the Nordics do in the sense of you get taxed quite heavily, but you also benefit quite heavily from the state. So your education, your medical, all that sort of stuff is covered, but it's covered across the board. And because you're taxed based on, I don't know how the tax tables work, because I didn't really go into that, but everyone's taxed almost at the same rate heavily. Everyone benefits from it the same way. There isn't this, the more you earn, the more you pay tax, or the less you earn, the less you pay tax. It's just, consistent. But they don't have necessarily any of the problems that some of the other states have, like the Americas or the UK or into Asia, where you have these divides between, almost the haves and the have-nots. And because the people that are affected mostly by this have been, people that earn either via manual labor, a role where they have to be there, face to face and that sort of thing. Or the industry they support doesn't need them because, you're in travel or hospitality where no one's traveling, there's no need for hospitality.
Yeah.
What do you do with those skills, or people without skills?
Absolutely, yeah. I mean, I'm hugely fascinated by the Nordics and the way they do these things. And, it wasn't that long ago. Well, they were, in mobile telecommunications, they were the forefathers of so much innovation there. And now in electrification of cars, that you've got Polestar and people there. Some people sort of seem to accuse that sort of societal model of not allowing innovation, but actually I look at them and go, it's not what I see. I see some pretty. I spent some time in Denmark last year, and innovation was left, right, and centre, and of course, Bang & Olufsen through to. Carlsberg, really forward-thinking organisation. So, I think it's there's a lot we could learn from that part of the world, and I can't wait to start travelling again and go there.
Well, I think the problem with a word like innovation, or what it's become, is that everyone's expected to be some drastically big thing, but innovation is just doing something different.
Yeah,
and if I look at some of you mentioned, the likes of Nokia or anything like that. They've come out because they were doing it differently, and it perpetuated across the world quickly because it was easy to adopt. What we're probably seeing, or not seeing as much now, so I'm trying to form this thought as I say it, is that people are making changes all the time to operate and just basically hustle through this pandemic. No one's seen that as innovation. They've just seen them as hustling. But you may end up with a whole bunch of new products or new services that are now available to you sort of naturally, because they've had to exist, but no one's really seen the catalyst that had to drive that.
Absolutely. I mean, that's what continuous improvement is, isn't it? And one of my clients and I, we created a Zoom-based TV show in 4 weeks.
Oh, wow.
For the CIO community. Normally, the client and I would put on a major EMEA conference, and my role is to support the CIO strand of that event. Obviously, that's not going to happen this year. It would have been next week, I think. But, in 4 weeks, a marketing agency, myself, and the team at Nutanix, we created a TV show using Zoom, bringing CIOs together. It was an amazing opportunity, and just shows actually what can be achieved. And it's just using standard technologies and building a virtual team.
And that TV show, is that something to air on an internal network, or is that YouTube sort of thing? Or
I think it's on YouTube. It's called the Cloud Council, COUNSEL. It was a fantastic project to be involved in.
Oh, that's pretty cool. And I think we need more of that. I think that there's a need for, because we're so spread out now and we can't get together, you need to adopt any other way to have a tribe.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
And do you think, so the future of that, the future of do you see us going back to sort of full time in the office again once we sort of get past COVID, or what are you getting from the market?
It's interesting, isn't it? I think an element of distributed enterprise is certainly for, as I say, that us fortunate to be knowledge workers is the norm. And, my wife has been working at home for, ever since lockdown, and says her productivity's up, and, it works. It's working for the business. It's working for her. And you hear that story right across the forum, don't you, that that's happening. And again, as I say, but for those roles that don't suit that, that's the challenge. What we do there. There's many benefits to it. I live in a rural town just at the very edge of Surrey, and really, if most of us don't get on a train and travel out of town to work, then we will surely spend more time in our towns and invest in our local economies. And that can be hugely to the benefit of the big major nationals and internationals, as well as the small local trader, and both require support.
Yeah.
Supply chains moved away from those because everyone was going to hubs. Now the spokes are becoming more important again, and that's an interesting economic change and an interesting dynamic again for the CIO to grapple with day in, day out.
Yeah, and that's where technologies that have been delivered, like Microsoft's new WBD platform, definitely, in one sense, take away one headache, but they create a whole new set of headaches, as things evolve, mostly with getting the people to adopt these things and use them.
Adoption rates were fascinating, weren't they, through COVID, of, everything from electronic signatures to full collaboration tools. In many organizations that already sat there, they've been implemented, but they just hadn't got over the adoption hump. And then suddenly, one Tuesday in March, we were told to adopt them, and we all did.
Well, yeah, because I don't know if you saw some of the stats. The amount of minutes that Zoom and Teams deliver on every day. It's in the billions. It's quite scary to even conceive that. And also the amount of laptops that were bought and all that sort of thing, which, there was a surplus, but there was no surplus by the end of that week. It was all gone.
Yeah.
You also mentioned that you do some writing for vendors. What sort of writing do you do for them?
It's a mix of some ghostwriting and just old-fashioned copy editing, really. There's a lot of vendors out there who don't, they use the same voice right across the spectrum of material they produce. And I've been very lucky to work with 2 or 3 companies who really understood that. It's a different voice for the CIO. It's a different voice. The DevSecOps guys don't speak the same as the CIO. Both are absolute pillars of the business, but the material, and there's absolutely no way I could write for the DevSecOps guys, because they'd want a level of technical detail that's way beyond my meager brain cells. But that business-centric stuff that I've been covering day in, day out for years, that's where I step in. So it's really good, and it's nice to see some vendors really. And a huge part of these commissions actually is usually they want to sit and learn as well. Actually, are we communicating with CIOs in the correct way? And when you sit down and look at their materials, and I say, no, it's too technical, or you're hitting them over the head, or they need partners. It's a tough job, and let's talk about how you can partner with them, what you can deliver hand in hand with them. And as I say, there's a couple of companies out there who have really embraced that and go, yeah, you're right, go for it. Write that, because we want to help these guys, because they've got tough jobs.
Yeah, I must admit the amount of content that we get bombarded with. You can't open LinkedIn without a couple requests a day to sell you some service or some product, and every so often there's a worthwhile conversation in it, but it's probably 1,000 to 1 or whatever. It's marginal.
Yeah.
Are you finding any sort of movement to using new media as opposed to written word, so going to video or podcasts or anything like that for those sorts of leaders?
Yeah, obviously the Cloud Council had a commercial element to it. The partner there ultimately needs to sell their wares and services in return for sponsoring this product. So that's a clear example of video. Obviously, we've seen a huge number. We're in sort of peak technology conference season right now. Normally it would have been VMworld in Barcelona, and weeks and Gartner Symposium and all of those, and of course they've all become virtual events, and some of them have been really good. I went to the TIBCO and OutSystems ones last week. Very impressive, and so all of that. But I think the written word still has huge amount of power to sort of underpin that, because you might listen to the CEO and think, she gets where I'm going with my business. That's good. Then you want to go, it's natural to want to dig deeper, and the human mind often digs deeper by reading. Yeah. Not always, but so I think that it's definitely both are growing in my experience. I think more written word, more video, more audio, more virtual events. I think we will go back to real live events when it's safe to do so. And I think that but they'll change. They're probably going to be a lot more targeted. I always had a question mark over some of them, that I went to that were just vast and huge jamborees. And as I say, having once written about motor racing, the scale was pretty similar to a Grand Prix in terms of, production values and people involved and therefore cost involved. I think that will change drastically out of this, even for the mega vendors. I think that, it'll be really interesting to see how they measure their marketing ROI for an event going forward. Be fascinating.
Yeah, it's been interesting because I think some things have changed this year. Like Apple had their event, and usually they wait a couple of weeks before they release sort of their new operating systems and that kind of stuff. And they almost went to event and then released straight away, which caught everyone who was used to that cadence unawares. Although iOS 14 is pretty buggy, so it probably could have waited another 2 weeks before they released it. But even with looking at some of the other big ones like Microsoft's things Ignite, that was quite nice just to sort of watch the videos. It was a much more streamlined event. It wasn't necessarily as convoluted as it has been. Not that I've traveled to one of those in the US, but the UK one is quite overloading. So it's nice to see some of those things get a little more of a reality check.
And they fit so much. They're actually good for your productivity in there. And I would put them on the iPad on the corner of my desk, carry on working, and then sort of look over when something had really jumped out at me. I was like, what are they saying here? Well, that's fascinating. That's really interesting. I hadn't looked at it that way. And then carry on with my work, and it just carries on, as a lover of radio and that, it's a very similar paradigm.
Yeah. Oh, super. Then Mark, where's the best place to get hold of you? LinkedIn or Twitter or something like that?
I'm on LinkedIn as obviously Mark Chillingworth. I'm on Twitter at @mchillingworth. There's a lot of stuff about mountain biking on there, which probably bore the most sensible business technology leaders to death. It's my obsession. They're the two main ones.
Great stuff. Are you ready to do the epic yet?
No, I don't know. I'm hoping. I was meant to be doing a Tour de Mont Blanc this year. Obviously, that didn't happen. So it's either that or Corsica next year is my plans for next year, because I've basically got some travel arrangements in place already, but we're all shelved for the time being. And then maybe epic the year after that. Who knows?
No, it's worth aiming for. It's pretty great. Super. Well, thanks for your time again, and pleasure chatting with you.
Cheers.
Thank you for listening to today's episode. Heather Bicknell is our producer and editor. Thank you, Heather, for your hard work on this episode. Please subscribe to the series and rate us on iTunes or the Google Play Store. Follow us on Twitter @the DWW Podcast. The show notes and transcripts will be available on the website www.digitalworkspace.works. Please also visit our website www.digitalworkspace.works and subscribe to our newsletter. And lastly, if you found this episode useful, please share with your friends or colleagues.